Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scot, and providing the wisdom of Rickon to counter my faith in Egan, it's Brian. Hey, Brian, how you doing?
Well, Scott, I just came down the elevator and I'm ready to get to work, so I think things are going well. How are you?
Well, I saw you come down the elevator. How's your head feeling? Because I feel like that elevator ride's a bit more painful nowadays than it used to be.
It certainly is, and I don't know where I've been for 5 months, but we'll get to that.
I see you're 5 months and I raise you nearly 3 years. Or if you're this podcast, 4.5 months. Anyway, we are here to kick off the way long, too long awaited second season of the Apple TV series Severance. A series we both adored so much when it aired nearly 3 years ago. So much so that Brian, my co-pilot here, he actually had it listed as his third best series of 2022. I actually loved it one notch more. I clocked in at number 2 on my best of 2022 list that year. It's a rare series that combines so many elements that we are always been partial to. Science fiction, psychological horror, as well as straight up comedy and drama. It's the show with a little bit of everything and like next to nothing else on TV today. I think it's probably one of our regrets that we didn't really discuss it much back in 2022, if I recall, because I went back and looked, and I know for me personally, that was a show I was watching with my friends on Sunday evenings. I don't think we started right when the show came on, so we were probably at least a few weeks behind. So that would be one of the reasons I wouldn't have brought it up. And maybe we were just focused on the specific series that we were covering at the time. I can't remember what we were doing. I think that was when we were still doing like Breaking Bad podcasts or getting ready for Better Call Saul and stuff like that back then.
It might even have been Perry Mason and Better Call Saul or something like that. But I also believe it's thanks to Apple's wonderful advertising department that we've discussed previously on other podcasts that this show kind of came out of nowhere and took things like gangbusters, but really, I think, built by word of mouth and not through the promotional campaign that they've taken on this time to really promote it. Probably the most promotion I've seen for an Apple show so far for this.
Yeah, I would say
this season,
other than the closest they would ever have come to it before, maybe how they went about stuff with Ted Lasso, perhaps, because that was a show that actually, clicked on the pop culture zeitgeist. But absolutely, I mean, when they recently did a thing where they had a pop-up at Grand Central Station here in New York City, and it was literally the entire cast was involved, and they set up the office cubicles right in the middle of Grand Central, almost put them in a little bubble where all the passerby were all staring and watching and, recorded them on their iPods and iPods. Wow. iPhones and such. Ben Stiller was walking around with them because as most folks know, Ben Stiller is one of the main executive producers and director of many of the episodes of the show. And then eventually, the people who portray Milchick and Cobel, they all show up as well. So they were all there. So they're definitely doing more promotion for this than ever before. So before we discuss the second season premiere, I was going to try to take a swing at doing a refresher overview on just what this show was about, where we left off, and what were among the many bubbling, boiling, smoldering, and burning questions we had after those first 9 episodes way back when. Now, I say this now, I'm probably going to be going on for a few minutes, but I am going to be covering what happened in season 1, And so y'all be patient, but it'll still be entertaining to listen to. And it's a good refresher course for y'all in case for some reason you didn't watch the almost 3-minute recap at the beginning of the new episode. I'm glad they did that, although I kept thinking they should maybe just put out like a 15-minute video to really cover so much of what happened in the first season. So, Severance. I look at Severance as a story that takes the concept of trying to achieve a true work-life balance to a disturbing and possibly dystopian extreme. It centers around the mysterious goings-ons at another monolithic and insidious company called Lumen Industries, which continues, as we all know, the long tradition of mysterious evil corporations. We love shows with evil corporations, like Mr. Robot's E-Corp, Blade Runner's Tyrell Corporation, the Terminator's Cyberdyne Systems, the loving folks behind Skynet. You can even go all the way back to the Silent Corporation. It's always some big evil company that's behind it.
Hell, even the Dharma Initiative.
Oh yeah, there's definitely links to Dharma here, and that's probably going to get mentioned at some point during our podcast. And speaking of Dharma, Lumen Industries also often feels like it's equal parts corporate and cult-like because they have a very faith-infused doctrine that guides its employees. It's kind of like Scientology on steroids. They have achieved a process called severance, in which after a horrific surgical procedure that seems to leave little in the way of scars somehow, despite opening up your skull to, inject a chip deep inside your brain, it effectively splits the consciousness of the person. It appears to be activated spatially, so that whenever the person rides down the Lumen Industries elevator way down to the Byzantine maze of endless dizzying white corridors, their conscious mind and personality shuts off. And a new one, their work self, or innie as they're commonly called, takes over, with no memory whatsoever of the person that they were up on the surface world. The main outie, or innie, that we're following in this series is Mark Scot. His innie goes by the shortened Mark S. He chose to have the procedure 2 years ago after losing the love of his life, his wife Gemma, in a fatal car accident. He works in the MDR department. That's short for Macro Data Refinement, with 3 other people. Dylan, who's an occasionally snide but driven colleague who's all about earning a waffle party prize at the end of the quarter. Irving, the more uptight senior man on the team with over 7 years in the department. And he's a very fierce advocate for being by the book and the Book of Egan and the guiding principles of Keir Egan, the founder of the corporation, basically L. Ron Hubbard. And he also has his growing, if unspoken, affection for Bert, the head of optic and design, which does seem to fly in the face of such a faith. And then the 4th person on the team is Helly, the new trainee who, unlike the other 3, isn't buying into any of what Mark and the rest of Lumen are selling and continues to try to escape and find a way to get a message to her outie, even at one point taking it to suicidal extremes. During the course of the season, we also meet several other important characters along the way, like Ms. Cobel, the person in charge on these premises, even though she has to answer to the mysterious board. And she's shrouded in more than a little bit of mystery herself, as she's also Mark Scott's gently prying neighbor, Mrs. Selvig. Her right-hand man, the main executor and enforcer of the rules at Lumen, is Mr. Melchick. He's always ready to whisk someone away to the break room, where you really don't get a break at all other than reading a creepy apology several hundred times. And he's constantly snapping photos, which I think we actually get an answer for that odd little idiosyncrasy towards the end of the series. At Lumen, there's also the somewhat shorter-lived head of security, Mr. Grainer, and then there was the wellness counselor, Ms. Casey, who turns out to be the severed version of the thought-to-be-dead Gemma Scot. Now, am I forgetting anyone significant? Oh, wait, you got Mark's sister, Devon, who was pregnant for most of the season until giving birth to their first child, a daughter, Eleanor, and her oddball husband, Rickon, who goes beyond New Agey in his philosophies and ways of looking at life, culminating in the publication of what I guess you'd call a self-help book. It's kind of like a dumbed-down Tony Roberts kind of a thing. It's something that is as goofy but not as scary as the teachings behind Lumen. Keir, wonderful Keir. And the only other character of significance I don't think I mentioned from season 1 would be Petey, who actually tracks down Mark Scot in the outie world. Petey, who had been a member of the MDR team but had vanished, and we find out he's not just essentially on the run from Lumen Industries, he had found a way to reintegrate his consciousness, even if the after effects are painful and ultimately fatal. Petey also reveals that he discovered a department at Lumen where the severed people don't get to leave. They're essentially, or apparently, severed 24 hours a day. I think that's a very key point to remember concerning matters like Mark Scott's thought to be dead wife, who's actually living less than a full life as Miss Casey. I should also point out the whole issue of severance is about as hot button a topic as abortion used to be, or as the Israel-Palestine issue currently is in the outie world. And that is one of the things that starts to lead Mark Scott to question what might be happening down there, just as any Mark S is, after numerous odd events, not to mention the fact he actually finds an advanced copy of Rick's self-help book. It's got him questioning things as well. All these things and more get us to the final episode of season 1, where after Dylan's innie had been awoken in his outie's home by Milchick, and he discovers in that shocking minute he has a son, he agrees to help everyone else by utilizing what they call the overtime contingency, which will wake up the other 3 for as long as Dylan basically can keep his arms spread apart to hold 2 switches down in the security room. At that point, Irving discovers he lives alone with a dog, but now he can track down Bert. Mark wakes up to find himself at his sister's house during a reading party for Rickon's book, and that is where he discovers Ms. Cobel is there posing as Mrs. Selvig. And then worse still, he finds out the missing wellness counselor, Ms. Casey, is actually his wife, Gemma. But Helly actually tops them all when she learns her outie is Helena, the latest in a long line of the Egans, the heir to care, so to speak. We left off that episode in the finale of the season with Irving pounding on Bert's door, Helly trying to expose the lies of what is really going on in the hell-like depths of Lumen Industries, the complex at least, and Mark screaming as he's trying to reach his sister, and he's screaming, "She's alive." Now, Brian, we both just did a rewatch of this series over the past week, and which was great because, again, it had been nearly 3 years since either of us had watched it, and it was great to be reminded of so many things I had genuinely forgotten, but it also reminded me of how many questions I had, and now I have even more before we ever touched the new season. Did you have a similar experience with it? I mean, were you reminded of things, but it also made you question more things, or how?
I had on a rewatch, I had a plethora of questions, and I watched episode 8 and 9 before the new season with my son, who just returned from college and found out he's watched the show 3 times, which kind of surprised me. And then he wanted to see my reaction to episode 1 of season 2, and we watched that together as well. But yeah, I mean, I made a couple of notes, and I'll tell you, I have some questions that we can talk to in the sections when we get there.
Gotcha.
But I mean, I have a bunch of questions, and I think we got some insight in this first episode about the direction this may go, but this show, who knows? I mean,
right.
it's pretty unpredictable, and I think the very beginning section is a great preparation for what this show does to you, and that is go down halls with turns and twists and stops and false starts, and leaves you confused but excited. So, I'm really looking forward to watching this season and talking about it.
Right, absolutely. So the kind of questions I had, I mean, there's big ones and little ones and medium-sized ones. I mean, Lumen might actually be more mysterious and confounding than Dharma ever was, quite frankly, since we brought up Dharma already. But look, it's another, what the fuck is going on here? Supposedly benevolent, but are they really a corporation? So, you start wondering what's the true agenda behind the severance procedure. As, it seems, the Elder Egan, he wants this to be spread across the world. Like everyone should get chipped. Is it some sort of world conquering control? Is it power? Is it all based on a twisted and garish religiosity and faith? Or is that a cover for something else? I mean, what is with all the things I actually do at Lumen? What's behind the refining of those happy and sad numbers? What is Optic and Design really up to beyond decorating the still mostly white walls of Lumen? What were those creepy picture cards really about? What were the goats really about? Why is all the tech rendered in such a retro fashion? Why is one of the principal bosses living next to one of her employees? What is with her fixation obsession with Mark Scott? And by the way, we get an answer to that in the first episode, and we know that's a lie. That's not, which is what
No, but that's one of the questions I wrote down.
Absolutely.
Is it was a classic lie that had just enough of truth in it
right.
that there is a weird obsession, and up on the rewatch, she lives next door. She's always intentionally goading him with her trash receptacles. She watches him, gets involved with his family, and even has a surprising reaction in the season finale when he says he's thinking of leaving. She hugs him and seems to be encouraging of him to do that.
I think there's something more to it, and it's not real. I don't. Well, I mean, I don't look at it just being about her, because there can't be a coincidence that they took his wife.
Yes,
and that goes beyond her. Because why? I mean, back to the question: why is his supposedly dead wife actually alive and working for Lumen? What is this testing floor that she was taken away to? I mean, apparently she must be one of the people who does not have a functioning Audi, since as far as the surface world knows, she's dead. We know why Mark chose out the procedure, but what about everybody else? Although I think we also kind of know why Helena had the procedure. We seem to get that by the end of the episode of the finale of last season. That it's almost to help promote the doing Severance and that whole garish gala they were having. Did I say garish twice in this podcast? No more. I mean, how much do people like Cobel and Milchick really know about what is going on, and why are they on board with it? And what about the board, for that matter?
How much of a life outside of Lumen does Milchick have? Does he leave Lumen? Does he ever leave other than for work purposes? We've not explored his outside life at all. And another question: what and where is this town? Is this a company town that exerts control over the residents of the city? That even the people not associated with Lumen are dependent upon it, and they provide all the vital services to the citizens. I mean, even the outside world's a mystery in this place.
Right. Although, since we have protesters within the same town who seem to be part, and his sister and brother live there, and they don't seem to be part of it, I don't know if it would be quite like to that extent. But I think there is something there. I think the specific area where Mark lives might be, you have that sameness, all the houses look the same, whatever. But I don't know. That's an interesting question. But which leads me to something we find out in the new episode, which I thought was very eye opening, and we'll get there when we talk about the episode. But that's actually an interesting thought there. And so. But what other questions I have here? Now that the Indies have seen the outside world, especially this is stuff we're going to find in the episode, especially what Mark and Kelly see, how can they proceed? How can they be brainwashed? Will they be tortured? Is Lumen allowing Miss Cobel to come back to work? Well, we know the answer to that one. What happened to the people and the former employee that was behind PV integration? Why can't Mark see how bad a date he really is? And and why on earth did his sister Devin what did she ever see in a lumpy putz like Rickon? Obviously, there's plenty more questions, but at a certain point, you might be questioning when we're going to get to the actual new episode, so we're going to get there now. Episode 1, which was titled Hello, Ms. Cobel. And just so you all know, this one was actually written by the series creator Dan Erickson, and it was directed by series executive producer that we mentioned earlier, Ben Stiller, who also directed, I believe, 6 of the 9 episodes from season 1. So, whereas, I believe every episode from the first season kind of featured its own form of severance. I mean, because we'd spend time with both the Innie and the Audi versions of Mark. This episode stays entirely within the subterranean Innie world, which means we're going to have to wait at least one more week to actually find out just what happened the moment the Innies were switched off. How does Bert react when when he finds a likely bewildered Irving on his doorstep? How does Helena react when the crowd is probably gasping, at the big gala where Helly just kind of blew the lid off of what's going on downstairs at Lumen. And would Devin even understand what Mark meant when he was screaming, "She's alive"? Would have been nice if he'd been yelling, "Gemma's alive," not "She's alive." But maybe she thought he was talking about her daughter. Who knows? But no, this episode is told completely from the Innie world, and it's mostly from Mark S's perspective. So, Brian, I figured we can discuss the episode by cutting it into, let's say, 3 acts. So, not so much a recap, and we're just going to talk about each section, the things that kind of caught our eyes, our ears, and things that really deserve to be chatted about more than others. So let's get into the first third, and we're going to call that first act "Welcome Back to Lumen." And like you said, it begins with the a multiple minute run of Mark through the white corridors of Lumen, because we're picking up right from him getting off the elevator. I think, do we first hear like the voices of what happened at the very end of the finale, and then it's him kind of like waking up in the elevator and then running around? Is that essentially how it starts?
Yeah, it sort of starts like the sounds of the last episode are sort of fading, and then you get that beautiful shot, where the camera either pushes in or pulls out to show what world you're in, pushes in, and he runs out of the elevator and begins that great sequence with the amazing camera work running through the halls.
So he eventually shows up at where the wellness center was, but now the doors have kind of been walled over. There is no more wellness center, essentially. Is that where you think he was running to all along?
Absolutely.
And not to find, is that the actual where the cubicles are? Okay, just checking.
I think that we will probably discuss later why any of these people would agree to come back if the story they're told is true.
Mm-hmm.
He's the easiest one to wonder why. I mean, he probably was begging to come back because he wanted to go try to get his wife.
Right. Any idea who the weird little blurry figure is in the background when we see him walking around the wellness center? Because it's not it doesn't look like it's Milchick to me. Because to be honest, I mean, he was blurry, but I think he looked Caucasian. Also wearing a different kind of suit, because I think it's a person wearing a more standard suit. Whereas when we see Milchick for the first time, I think he's wearing kind of a jacket over. Was it like a black turtleneck kind of an outfit, if I'm not mistaken? Okay, so let's just get to it. He does eventually get to where the classic little 4-pod is, except it's not Dylan, Irving, and Helly. It's 3 other people. And I believe folks like me and you and probably most other viewers, we certainly recognize 2 of the actors, which kind of make you go, "Oh, look who's here. Oh, look here. I don't know who that guy is, but look at those 2." So that was an interesting little development, because it's the first inkling we got, and then we find out so much more later on, like, oh, this isn't confined to just one place, this one, complex, this one department only exists here. This exists in other places as well. We will find out later, it's a whole lot of other places, which makes us realize just how massive an undertaking what Lumen Industries is, whatever. But we should mention that the people here, it's Mark W., who's played by Bob Balaban, who a lot of people will recognize from multiple things over the years, whether it's everything from Seinfeld to, 2010, the year we made contact or something. Then we have, we thought we weren't going to see her again after the old man, but there she is again. What was it? What's her name? Aaliyah Shawkat, whatever. We'll always be partial to her because of Arrested Development, but she is, I believe her character name is Gwendolyn Y. And then there's a third person who speaks mostly Italian and a little bit of broken English. I don't remember what his name. What was his name? Do I have his name here? I don't. Did I? Is that the one person whose name I forgot to write down? Yeah, that's probably why. Anyway, yeah, Italian guy. We'll just call him Italian guy. When he shows up again, I'll make a note of what his name is. Hopefully, that's not a harbinger of me forgetting things for this podcast. But this is when Milchick comes in. So I like them telling, how we find out that it's been 5 months. And the minute you hear it's been 5 months, you're like, okay, but he's just waking like it just happened. So that means his Audi has been unwilling to come back here for the past 5 months. And then, much like him, we're wondering, where are the other three? What's going on here? Go on.
Or has he been denied access there for 5 months and he did want to come back? I mean, the beauty of the way they tell you the time flip is that at the moment it happens, you are disoriented as he is.
Right.
In that moment.
Right.
So you then are asking yourself the questions we're posing right now, the same way he is in that moment where he's realizing it's been 5 months.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the key things for a series like this, and it's reminiscent of other things that we've watched, is we are rarely ahead of the characters. We're usually in the same position they are. We didn't know Ms. Casey was actually going to be Gemma until he finds out. We might have suspected it. It's one of those things when you go back, it's funny, doing the rewatch, there's a few things where you're like, oh, look at, there's all these hints all over the place, but I can't, and it's been so long, I don't remember if I was suspicious of that or not. I'm gonna say I probably wasn't. I'm not gonna claim that I was, but it's very funny when you do a rewatch, like, oh, look how they layered in the little hints here and there and whatever. But I think that's key because, well, first of all, it makes it much more fun to watch because then I think it's more fun just to keep having questions and theorizing, whatever, like a show like Lost did, for example. Like because even when we spend time with characters like a Milchick or in the first season, Miss Cobel, nothing's being revealed to us that answers questions much any more than makes us wonder more things. It's like, oh, she's like middle management. She's not really all that important after all. That's the kind of revelations we got during season 1 or something like that. But not anything like just what is this board, or like, well, why do they have to use a person talking to them? Why are they so rude? But so I love one of the additions, and we meet in this first act. It's when Milchick he goes with Milchick back to Milchick's office, which is now clearly where Miss Cobel used to be, and we find out that she was fired, and we'll get into that in a second. But it's that new addition, that new person. I think they said her title is deputy manager. I mean, she's essentially what Milchick was before, I think. What's her name again?
Miss Wong.
Miss Huang, whatever. And it's everyone keeps reacting to how she clearly looks like a child. isn't there like a great exchange between her and I think it's
Dylan.
Mark. Is it Dylan? No, no, there is one later. I'm talking about in this first part. It's the Bob Balaban character, the Mark W. He says, "Why are you a child?"
Oh, yeah.
And she says, "Because of when I was born."
Yeah, yeah.
Which is such a great answer.
Yeah. But it's the great thing about this show is the ethical questions it asks. The people on the inside often refer to their lives as being like the age they've been there because that part of them's only been alive that long.
Right.
So in many ways, like that version of them is childlike in not knowing what's happening, being naive to the things happening around them. And now you actually have the physical manifestation of a child being there and being their boss.
It's also funny with all the issues that Lumen Industries would have with the public, with Severance and all the other things they do, that they would even do something which is essentially akin to child labor. So that struck me as an odd choice.
Hmm.
So during this scene, that's when, and I put this in heavy hand quotes, we find out what happened or what happened according to Milchick. And then we start to question everything he says. I don't know how much we can believe. And if you start freeze framing your TV, whatever, you can already start poking holes in things. Like he refers to how all four of them, they achieved international fame. They became the face of severance reform. And he pulls out a newspaper, which is all about what they've done. And there was a parade for them. Did anybody, pause your screen on that newspaper? And I'm not talking about the fact that he's showing them a copy of the newspaper, yet they redacted like most of the articles there,
Oh, you mean the publisher, Lumen?
Right. Did you look at the photo? Did you look at the photo? Go look at the photo, which is supposed to be them in a car in the parade, whatever. It's clearly they photoshopped the shot they took of the four of them in season 1. And that's the shot of them. They photoshopped them into the car, but it's the same exact image. It's a fairly unconvincing Photoshop job.
Like Michael Scott level Photoshop.
I just thought that was really funny. I thought maybe he was just going to like flash the newspaper and really quickly then pull it back before he could really study it for a second. Because I would have been, wait a second, I can tell it that's a Photoshop job, whatever. And that's when he talks about how, for the past 5 months, we've been wondering how a sadist like Harmony Cobel could take fertile root in Lumen's soil. And he comes up with the reason, not just about her being fired, but what the deal was between her and Mark S. And it was that she was trying to get into a throuple with the two sides of Mark. Oh boy.
Milchick is a wonderful character because he at times provides both some of the funniest moments, but he's also very menacing.
Yes, absolutely.
At times, and I think that his character moving up, it'll be interesting to see what he does with his power as the manager.
Oh, I think he's fantastic. Again, having just watched season 1, but now just seeing what he does in this episode alone, there are different things he reacts to, which kind of show, how do I put this? I don't want to say a more human side to him. But we'll talk about it when it happens. But there's several moments with him which are like, I kind of like that. It's showing a little bit of, how annoyed he can be about something, how much he really probably doesn't like somebody, apparently. He's an interesting character. We also are told that while Mark's out, he wanted to go back in, but the others refused. I like that Mark's showing a lot more balls now, that this is not the same Mark that we had seen enter that office throughout most of season 1. And there was no one threatening to throw a mug at him either, quite frankly. But I like when he just kind of like stepped in, like, I'd like to hear it from them. And he's like, that's not possible. It's like, and of course they give him balloons, which is just ridiculous. And then, we spend more time with them and the new gang, whatever. And, and as the episode's moving forward, you start wondering, are we really not going to see the other 3 for this episode? Are we really just going to be spending time with this new gang? And I said, well, that's a gutsy choice, but, I'm not sure that's the best way to go. They even play a table version of the ball game that they'd done in season 1. Oh, by the way, I love the exchange between Mark S. and Miss Huang when Mark decides to be kind of he's almost doing a parody of old Mark from season 1, where he says something along the lines like, I'm just so happy I'm back and I've made 4 new friends. And she's kind of quick to coldly point out that she's a supervisor and not a friend. And you have that really lengthy pause between them. There's a lot of moments with her where it's just kind of these creepy little stare downs with that young actress. And he just smiles like, three new friends.
Yeah, yeah, just completely sarcastic.
It's so good. But this eventually is we eventually see Mark jotting something down, writing a note, and then realize, okay, he's actually not on board with any of this. And we discover he tries to frame Mark W. And, he's busted in front of everybody, and everybody suddenly goes really cold to him. I love, I love Gwendolyn going, do you even really have a brother-in-law? Just of all the things to question, it's just so ridiculous. But, I love Mark being this almost a little evil smirk where he says, "Oh, you haven't even seen what I did to the kitchenette."
Yeah.
By the way, we never find out what he did to the kitchenette, and I'm really annoyed about that because I'm kind of like, well, what did he do? It had to be something major. You didn't just like dump, ketchup all over the place or something. But he uses it as a distraction to try to contact, the board, try to see his friends again, etc. And that's which eventually leads to him being fired. And when you're fired, they're basically killing you because you will cease to exist. That's one of those things that one has to keep in mind whenever talking about either trying to escape or if you want to leave, you'll be allowed to leave. But they're basically telling you that, you will not exist anymore. So it's, I don't know another way to phrase it. They're murdering you,
A version of you ceases to exist.
Right. In the multiverse, that thread is now broken. So that, I think that kind of effectively ends the first act, so, the first act, we get to meet this new gang of people, and we'll see if we see them again throughout the season. I was on IMDb. I already know the answer to that question, but technically we're not supposed to know. So I won't say it here. We will. Anyway. So let's move to the second act. And I like to call that the Macrodat Uprising. Cause we pick up he's gotten on the elevator, he gets off, and things are different. He's, there's that creepy painting. And it's presumably I guess it's supposed to be Keir Egan. And it appears like it's four people who are buried up to their shoulders in front of a firing squad. And when you look closely at the painting, even though it doesn't really look like them, you kind of sort of get that it's supposed to represent, Mark, Dylan, Irv, and Helly. You realize it's three men, two of them have beards, and a woman. It's supposed to be them. And I believe I think it's when Dylan shows up. He's the second person to show up, and he's the one who reads the little card next to the painting, and it says Keir pardons his betrayers. They are the betrayers, clearly.
Right.
So I was thinking, wow, wonder who in optic and design worked on that painting. I guess couldn't have been Bert, so maybe it was, what's her name? The woman that he worked with all the time. Although he had
I wish I knew enough about art history to know if those paintings, are riffs on famous paintings or if they're just created specifically for this show, because some of them are really horrendously beautiful. I mean, they're terribly disturbing,
right,
but really well done.
Oh yeah, that painting from season 1, which, and depending which version they saw, it was supposed to be the revolt of one of the departments against the other. Whether it was, optic and design killing macro data refinement or vice versa. But they saw the other version which had the badges, which looked like it had just been painted in quickly thereafter or something. But it's people's, guts being ripped out. It's a little disturbing. So, everybody shows up here, and it seems the impression is people are showing up, like Irving, for example. He seems to be showing up right from the point where he was pounding on Bert's door. because you can hear him in the elevator and experiencing it again. So, like, once again, we're left wondering, okay, if we go on the assumption they weren't lying about 5 months, because there'd be no reason to lie about that. But what, he could have said 5 minutes instead of 5 months. It really wouldn't have mattered. You start again. You're left wondering what was going on, in the outie world, and what. So first, and why they agreed to do it now? But perhaps Mark getting that message to the board actually clicked with somebody, and then they decided to. And how? But how were they convinced? How was Irving convinced to go through this again? Dylan, what convinced him? Because I assume what we heard about him was probably true, that he'd found out what happened and was appalled by it or whatever. Helena, we know her story. She's probably the one we can figure out the most easily as far as what's going on in the outside world, why she might agree to go back or not, I think.
Well, I'm going to ask a question at the end about that.
Okay. Yeah, we have a big question,
but the idea that they all come back at the moment the OTC switch was flipped. The only thing that I'm not clear about is, Dylan didn't go outside.
Right.
And so when those moments happened, he didn't gain the insight the other three did.
Right.
And I'll be curious if we see his life on the outside in that 5 months to fill some of that in. Because that's, I think he knew what was going on in there. But the question is, on outside him, would he say, I quit without knowing what happened? And I think a story breaking could have that impact, but I'm not sure a story broke. So we'll have to see what happened there.
Right. Absolutely. So they're taken to the break room, and usually when we hear we're going to the break room, that's not good. And of course, my first thought was also, they're being told they're taken to the break room. We know that's basically, the Lumen version of their weird torture. Why are you agreeing to go along with this? He's one guy. It's four of you. Although none of you are exactly physical specimens, but still, there's four of you. Dylan's taken him on a couple times. He bit the shit out of him in one episode, right?
And he owes him a belt.
Yeah, it owes him a belt. Couldn't get past the belt thing.
It's just good.
So we go to the break room. We go down that ridiculously narrow corridor once again. But when it opens up, it's a different room. By the way, the Lumen inspirational posters that are all over the walls are so ridiculous. I wrote down a few of them. Those Frolicaholic, BEE, ever merry, and there's like a little B in the picture. There was one that was Grin and Baird, spelled BAIRD, it. And I started going, should I know who Baird is? Is that something I should know? Because it's not Beard. What does Baird mean? Am I missing? Did I miss something important? Was that a character? Was that one of the family? The
Egan's.
Yeah. Why did I forget the Egan's name? Wow. Was it one of them named Baird Egan? I don't remember that. Anyway. So I think Milchick essentially says, we heard your complaints and we've made changes, and they're going to watch something which is akin to like it's almost like a new orientation video. It's Lumen is listening. And this was one of the most fun things I got to sit through in the last few weeks. It's rendered in semi-claymation. It's narrated mainly by the voice of the building itself, the Lumen Industries complex.
And have
And
you heard who the speculation about who that voice is?
oh no, I know who the voice is.
Okay.
Oh no, it is that person. I actually know the voice of that voice and the water tower's voice. The voice of the building is Keanu Reeves. And there's a moment where it has a back and forth with the water tower. By the way, I didn't realize that was a water tower until said it was a water tower. I was like, oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I knew it was a tower of some kind. It seemed odd. That water tower is voiced by Sarah Sherman. She's on Saturday Night Live. She does voices and stuff on that as well. And we get to find out different things. And that's when we get to hear about the phrase, the Macrodat Uprising, and how they're considered heroes. And we see different versions of them in like I said, in that semi-claymation form. By the way, Dylan doesn't come off great in here at all. He doesn't get like a really cool moment other than, eating snacks. But this little thing, that's where they mentioned it's branch 501. And I think it's also during, it was like, wow, 501. And I believe it's during that video that we get the sense of just how big and global a company Lumen Industries actually is. I don't think I wrote it down specifically, but if memory serves, I think they mentioned something like they're in 206 different countries. And obviously there's clearly multiple, complexes throughout the United States. So you can probably guess 206 countries. They probably have over 1,000 buildings, around the world, probably even more than that. That's kind of amazing and scary. Not as scary as finding out their idea of reforms are tasty new snacks like fruit leather, cut beans, Christmas mints, and salsa. But wait, there's more. Look, hall passes, which is, because, as Milchick mentioned, he felt really bad about keeping them all caged up like animals and such. Pineapple bobbing? Now, wouldn't that be a problem?
Oh, terrible.
Like, oh, so what's next? So we got you some barbed wire for dental floss, whatever. And but Brian, there's also a new playful mirror room.
Yeah, yeah, and you can go to the porcupine petting zoo.
Oh well, thank Kier for the Macrodat Uprising.
Thank you. But all these changes are, the new benevolent face of Lumen. And then we get the revelation that, hey, guys, just wait till the end of the day. And you decide if you'd like to stay or if you don't want to stay. And Milchick is, trying to be the new compassionate manager. And it really was an interesting turn that I didn't see coming.
Yeah. And with Milchick, it feels like you can't quite trust anything he's saying because, we've seen him lie. But then you had to wonder when he goes through the trouble of telling them that there's, they can talk, there's no microphones or cameras here. And they don't believe it for a second, but they continue to have the conversation. They figure they'll whisper it or something, which I'm thinking, if there's microphones, they'll still be picked up. But, what are they going to do? So they do. So Milchick and Miss Huang. By the way, we get it again later, but I'm going to mention now. Did you pick up on the vibe that Milchick is not a fan of little Miss Huang? Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, there seems to be something inherent in that position that you're not fully respectful of whoever your assistant is. And, Miss Cobel kind of was disrespectful several times to him and dismissive of him. And it almost begs the question if that's not, how you're supposed to act or expected to act in that position.
Okay, I guess I just felt a more clear animosity here than I did between Cobel and Milchick, but I get what you're saying. Maybe it's because they look at hierarchy and whoever's in that position is the person who would ascend to their chair. So they naturally, that's how they, cause like Milchick has just done to Cobel. So maybe, oh, now this person is going to be, and look who it is. It's a child, which almost demeans the fact that he had just held that position. It's like, oh, and now just like, someone who's basically somewhere between the ages of 8 and 12 can hold the position that I had.
Right. It's disrespect both for the position he held and saying that hey, to help you, we're going to give you a child instead of someone who's more experienced and powerful, like the way he saw himself.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So then we have the conversation between them talking about what they experienced. So, okay, let's just cut to the chase here. I mean, obviously, Mark is the only one who actually tells them what happened. And we know why Irving doesn't, because Irving's traumatized, because it's more about a broken heart and how he saw Bert, whatever. Helly's decision not to tell them who she actually is in the surface world, outie world, whatever. And there's a lot of reasons one could surmise why she's going about that. I was curious to hear what you thought about it.
Well, I've gone back and forth because there are two ways to look at what she's done. Annie Helly did get the threat from Miss Cobel that if she went through with what she was going to do, that the others could be locked in there and tortured, and then decided to go ahead and do it. And she could have come back out of a sense of guilt to make sure that they weren't tortured or treated poorly. And obviously, it would be hard to look them in the eye and say, look, I'm with you guys when I'm here, but when I'm outside, I'm a member of the family that's doing this to us. So there are two sides of that, which brings me to the interesting question. Is she still severed, or is she inside this season as outside Helly to see the extent of the damage that her Annie Helly did with that press conference if it did get out to the world? And that will be an interesting question. But if she is Annie Helly, I can see why she would feel compelled to come back, for fear of what she did and how it could have impacted these people that maybe she does care about. And I thought there was an interesting, I don't want to say threat, but there was showing Mark and Helly kiss and that they knew that. That's sort of a cute moment, but that also is like, hey, we know what you guys are to each other. So, if there's a lever we could use on you, like Helly, we can hurt Mark. Mark, we can hurt Helly. And then we see not Bert, I'm sorry. We see Irving and Dylan have maybe the first time Dylan shows true emotion after this, when Irving's considering leaving, that, Dylan really doesn't want him to leave and tries to hold him. And I think Irving has the greatest line. He says, "I'm your favorite perk." So, I mean, there is a little bit of, hey, I can hurt these other people because of you. And so as it applies to Helly, I'm not sure where I land, but I think there's a real possibility that she's outie Helly doing research to what these people, are doing inside to see if Severance is savable.
I was thinking about it, and I think the fact that so much time has passed is key. And by the way, we didn't mention earlier, there's also something very meta about the amount of time that's passed with the show, with, it being 5 months. And I think Milchick says in the very beginning, yeah, it's been a minute. And I think we're all kind of winking at the fact it's been almost 3 years since the show's been back on. But specific to the Helly situation, if this had only been days later, then I would absolutely think it's any Helly in hell, um, as she was before. Because when we left off the show in season one, the only reintegration that had ever happened had been what was done with Petey by the woman who they, as far as we know, we don't know what's happened in the last 5 months. They have not found her. The person who used to work for Lumen, I believe. I can't remember. She had a longer name. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But she was the one who killed.
She's the one that may have gotten a minor league contract. Playing baseball because she swung a mean bat.
Right. Well, and if she was Japanese, she'd be playing for the Dodgers. But anyway, but the fact that so much time has passed makes me think, oh, now that they have found out that reintegration is possible, even if they haven't captured or gotten that woman, they might have figured out how it's done, and thus they would be able to extract the chip out of Helly, or Helena, and she would be able to go down there, posing as Helly, and that's what's more possible now. So I keep thinking that. I keep thinking about that potential reveal here, and I'm going back and forth on it because I'm trying to decide if it's her, if that's if that's the latest in a long line of Egans. Except I think she's actually married because she has a different last name, but we haven't seen whoever she's
Riggs,
married
I
to.
think.
Yeah. So curious about that too. What's the end game? What's the ultimate end game? Because, I mean, a corporation like this, it's that huge and clearly that powerful. I don't know how quite they could be undermined by just these few people, which then gives credence to the fact this did come out as a story, and that's why they can't. Because otherwise, honestly, wouldn't they just, get rid of Mark altogether? Get rid of Dylan and Irving altogether. It's 3 people, But I think it's because it did become a news story. Because when Helly was doing that, it was at a big gala with all these cameras. That happened.
And a senator attended. So you have to believe the press would be there. Even if it's not the story they saw, you have to believe there were, other press outlets there. Which is, I tend to believe that it's any Helly.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure.
I feel they're going. They know that anyone watching that has to be a thought one might have. If it's her, I feel they have to have done something to reverse the process, because I don't think unless they've come up with a way to switch it off for the spatial thing or something, whatever, because otherwise she would, in the way she could stop becoming the any version again. But I like the idea that they've put it out there, so that now we're going to be questioning that and her actions all season. There's going to probably be a moment or two here, be like, I wonder if that means this or that. So now it's interesting. The character that we were most, clearly wanted to get the hell out of there, wasn't buying into anything. Now we find that character to be the most suspicious one because of who she turns out to be on the surface. So I like that they've created something that's just that much more, adds a couple more levels of intrigue that hadn't even occurred to me until this scene when she doesn't reveal what happened. And now it's like, wait, oh, that's interesting. It could be something as simple as she feels bad because she's, if not, she's part of what's responsible for all this, so it could be as simple as that. But I don't find anything to be all that simple on the show, so I'm not ready to accept it's as simple as that. And the last part of the show, I just call it final decisions, because it's them making that decision. So as you mentioned, Milchick has given them the option, we will let you leave, which means, we will kill you, or you will cease to exist, whatever. And yes, that the scene between Dylan and Irving. It's probably emotional. Emotionally, it's probably might be the best scene in the entire episode. The exchange that you had mentioned, as far as being his favorite perk. Um, although, I did find it funny that maybe it's because 5 months have passed. Although in his mind it hasn't been. I thought Dylan was doing a little bit of revisionist history. It's like, I don't recall you being on board with him and Bert getting together. You seem to keep calling Bert a fuck, and you should stay away from him.
And locking him in the conference room and threatening to kill him.
Yeah. So what's going on here?
I got you guys together.
But we do have the conversation between Helly and Mark, and we're wondering, and that's where we get more about why Mark is there. And we're waiting for it. We kind of know what the reason is. Even though I love him saying it's mushy. As far as either how he feels about her, the person, it's like, there was nothing between me and Miss Casey. I didn't feel anything, but he knows who she is. He knows the significance. And you start wondering if anything kind of bleeds through at all, whatever. So he says he's going to stay to help. He wants to help his outie and find out what happened to her. And I like that. So what's intriguing here is that she chooses to stay. She's the one who really has the valid choice here. If she's any, because she knows exactly who she is. She's the one that really doesn't have to stay. So I find her Helly just becomes more fascinating to me because I'm going to be questioning her agenda the whole time. And that's such a reversal of what she was in season 1 that just, it's not to the extreme of taking someone you rooted against and now you're rooting for them. It's not Sawyer, in Lost terms, but it's like 24 where all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. No, Jack's girlfriend might be evil after all or something,
But you see the complexity and the sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it will call into question everything she does and how she exerts influence on Mark and Gemma and what that means, what that could play out as. Right. It'll be very interesting to watch. I thought that was the most fascinating thing. And then making the decisions, getting the team together. I mean, I have to say it felt good. And the economy with which they dispatched the initial team and got these guys back together, you weren't sure that would happen. But to put the team back together by the end of episode 1 and have the video and the arc of what happened in those months and introduce this doubt with Helly, I thought was a really great first episode.
Right. And I mentioned something about possible bleed over between them, and we know that's actually happened. So it's something one of the things that I skipped over, going back to the conversation between Dylan and Irving. Irving mentions, by the way, it mentions that he's a painter. There's easels, and I love love Dylan. There's easels up there. But he mentions seeing dozens of paintings of dark hallways that lead to an elevator with a down button. And we've seen that dark hallway and that elevator and that down button. It's where we saw Miss Casey go when she was being sent back to the testing floor. And somehow that image is showing up and coming out in the art of Irving up on the surface world. So I think that's very interesting because why is that character experiencing that? What has he gone through where that would be coming through in his head?
Right. Or what has he done? Was he Milchek in a previous life and took somebody to the down elevator or, like the way Bert and him always seem drawn to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, I wrote this down, that there's credence to the theory that Irving was a Melchek type character, because if you remember in his lockbox, he has information that I don't think a Severed would have. He had
Yeah,
Bert's home address on that paper.
right.
He had documents and
And various
things
other people too, apparently.
and other people, like he had lists, like he had an employee list. So it makes you wonder if he's walked somebody down that hall to that elevator, felt bad about it, and maybe that's why he wanted to be severed. Was like that was so
I
terrible.
think that's exactly what it is. I think I like. I'm glad you brought it up because I think we might have glossed over it and waited till they actually get to it. So I'm glad we talk about it now because you'll get some brownie points for this podcast now when does come out. I think that's the only possible answer. Whether it was that specific position or not, I don't know. But I kind of, for the economy of storytelling, it kind of make just to say it is. And then he decided to go, he didn't want this, guilt, whatever. And he did this, went through Severance, whatever, which is fascinating that he would choose to go through Severance considering he was on the other side of seeing, and then you chose it. So it's almost like he's paying penance. And maybe that's why he's also living a seemingly solitary life, on the surface world as well, that he's punishing himself. So it's interesting that one of the things that Irving says in his conversation with Dylan, and he's referring to, the pain of seeing Bert with someone else that, he can't be with him up there. But he talks about how he wants the pain to be over. And I'm wondering if that was something that he had experienced before. So that's a fantastic insight there. Later in the episode is where we get so much good stuff. Milchick wants to see Dylan, which already made me go, ooh, okay, interesting. I'm always looking forward to scenes that don't necessarily have the principals involved in them, whatever. And we get a little bit of fun here. First of all, we find out that the welcome screen on the computer in what used to be Ms. Cobel's office, they can't remove the hello, Ms. Cobel that's, constantly like floating and flashing on it. And I'll tell you right now, I was waiting the whole episode. I'm thinking, okay, at the end of this episode, we're going to go back with Audi Mark and he's going to be next door. He's going to see Ms. Selvig and he's going to say, hello, Ms. Cobel. I thought that's how they're going to end the episode from the very beginning. Needless to say, they didn't do that. And I'm like, oh, okay. You tricked me, you bastards. You put her name in the damn title. She's not even in the episode. Just that was there. And he tells Dylan that his name, well, first of all, just when he says this, your wife's name is Gretchen. And then we find out there's a new renovation being built there. It's the Audi Visitation Suite. And you start wondering, like, is this for real or not? And obviously, he's telling Dylan separately from everybody else. And he's saying, oh, it's because you have a family and they're single. That's stupid. And we know that doesn't matter because, then Mark would be able to see his sister, for example, and stuff like that. He's causing a divide in the group. He's going to have, by telling Dylan about this, and Dylan's all excited about it, he's like, I can see my family here. And like, if you take the name of the room at face value, I'd say yes.
Yeah, great line.
There's a lot of great stuff between, like, holy fuck, the holiest.
the beauty of it is, I mean, it's very reminiscent of visits in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Like the ethical question of it, that you're only there 8 hours. Why do you need a family visitation center? Do I think there's any plan for this? No. But I think you're right. It's a carrot to dangle in front of the, perk lover to say, here's a special perk for you so that he can thwart any hijinks with the idea that he's going to get this and his Annie can learn about his outside life.
Well, keep in mind, just much like you just mentioned the prison thing, Milchick himself refers to not wanting to keep them in a cage. I don't want to be your jailer. He refers to the fact that they were tortured. there's all these prison analogies. And although they're there for quote unquote 8 hours a day, not as far as they know.
Right. Exactly.
There's no sleep for them. It's one continuous, it's the same 8 hour loop over and over. Just, maybe the activities change, but that's all they are. So they're there. They are, it's life in prison because it's forever for them until they,
Right.
retire, which means they die anyway, just like what happened to Bert, or that self dies, so to speak.
It's just so profound, the questions this show raises. And I wanted to move on from that and ask you, um, the scene with Adam Scott's character working.
So
We
at the
get the
ending,
flash. Yeah.
yeah, the ending is important. I have so much to say about that.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we have the ending, right? He's working on his computer. We end the episode because we're in the last minute or two of it anyway. Mark's at his computer. He's working. He's accomplished. And he's doing the stuff with the numbers, grouping them, and we see at the bottom of the screen a 68%, 68%, whatever. And then there's a flash on the screen, and the impression isn't that he sees this. This is something this is one of the few times something I think is being revealed to us, but not to him. And the flash on the screen, it's Gemma's face, or Ms. Casey's face, however we want to refer to her. But we see other things on the screen. We see a location. It's Cold Harbor. She has a very severe appearance in the way she looks. You see at the bottom of the screen, there's also something indicating, was it 68%, which might be a connection to whatever she is doing or going through is directly connected to what Mark is doing. But then if you look closely, there's these little 2-letter anagrams at the bottom of the screen. We see them repeated, and they all have numbers attached to them as though there's certain quotas or amounts attached to each one. And I believe the anagrams are WO, FR, DR, and MA. Which if you know your Egan literature, those 4 little anagrams would be short for the 4 tempers: woe, frolic, dread, and malice. And for the listeners who might not remember when this is explained in season 1, the whole philosophy of Egan was that these are the 4 tempers, for which is what makes up the human soul. And the human soul is made up of certain quantities of each of these tempers: woe, frolic, dread, and malice. And now we're seeing that on the bottom of the screen and the amounts, and you're going, okay, is this a direct connection to what macro data refinement is doing?
Yes.
So, because that's where, if one's going to get into the beginning of the major theories or speculation about severance and whatever, it's what are they doing? And the specific department. And one could theorize everything from what they're doing is directly connected to the chips that are in people's heads, and all these number gatherings and collecting. It's about, could be everything from creating and setting algorithms for things to, debugging issues that might be with chips and the brain synapses of all these people. And it's so important because, especially since they want to expand this worldwide. But here it gets more into, because I said this, it's interesting how you have something which seems to be equal parts science and, metaphysical aspects, stuff which is more faith-based, the soul, the very soul itself. And that's what this seems to be implying. Which is, I don't know if that makes it better or worse. It's because at least if it's something that's more, even if it's wacky science, if it's grounded in it, okay, I understand why it's important. This is something which is more based on what they believe. I don't know. I think we're going to have to find out more about it to really understand if there's a how this can be quantitative, how this can be proven to really be what it is, and why are we seeing it with Gemma? Is this what is going to make her an actualized person? I don't really know what to make of that.
I
What were you thinking?
I think when you go, I don't think the four characters we focus on would end up in the testing floor. I think the testing floor is more for cybernetic type people. Like my guess is Gemma never leaves there since her accident. I
Mhm.
believe she crashed and somehow her body was brought there, and there is some, I don't want to say robotic, but some process through which they've kept her alive and tried to build her mind through macro data refinement. I believe macro data refinement. That's why there are four people, one for each of the four
Uh-huh.
tempers. And if you recall, when they were trying to teach Helly, like her job was to look for numbers that are scary, and you'll know it when you see it. And any scary numbers are to be taken out. And my guess is those are the sort of emotions that can lead to too much passion, too much individuality, too much aggression. And I think they're refining. I don't know if you would say it's an algorithm, like they're building, an AI to run these chips or something. But I think that's what they're doing. And I think we're going to find out that Gemma is a early test subject of trying to implant a consciousness into someone who may have passed and doesn't have their own anymore.
Huh. All right, I could buy into that. I mean, that's probably as as plausible, if not more so, than say, I don't know, cloning or something like that, which was another thought. I know that's out there as well. Um, it's interesting with the four tempers how one can kind of, there may be a little bit of a circle and a square hole kind of thing, but you can kind of make the case that each of the four people represent those four tempers. Whoa, that's unfortunately that's Mark for what he went through with his, whatever. Dread seems to feel more like Irving because of how Malice is clearly Helly, and Frolicle. Dylan's the least has been always been the least serious of the four. Um, and it would make sense because if Helly was essentially brought in to take the place of Petey, he took Malice to an extreme where he kind of rebelled against everything. And that's exactly what she was doing during season one, was again, rebelling against things. Interesting that the person they chose to fill that slot would be the any version of, someone, the heir to the founder of the entire thing. So that was a calculated risk, because I keep feeling, if the more I thought about it, you kind of know whoever is going to take that seat might take on some quality of that persona. So I thought that was really, really kind of interesting. Cybernetics. Yeah, I could see them going that route. Uh,
Because remember, we saw the senator's wife have a baby and not remember it in season one. When
right.
Mark's sister sees her at the park and she seems to not recall her at all. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
they're clearly showing. Yeah, I thought that was their way of clearly showing that there are things with Severance going on that don't involve people going down to the lower depths of that building.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
I thought that.
So, I mean, I thought it was fascinating. Now, my final thought, and I saved this for now. You asked earlier who was the man behind Mark
Uh-huh.
when he's walking. Who's the only position down there we haven't seen filled and we don't know who it is yet? It's the head of security.
Security. Yeah.
And we don't, and did they hide that because it's going to be somebody now that we've saw last season that's coming back, and now they're going to be head of security?
Well, going along with what you just said about your theory about Gemma, I haven't looked to see if I haven't looked at, and they might have. they might have been careful not to give it away on IMDb, because I did notice that they had actors mentioned but didn't have character names for them to not give things away. If Gemma was someone who generally was in a car accident, was nearly killed, and they basically kind of brought her back, whatever, is it possible that they might have done the same thing with Grainer? Because we were only told things. We don't know. We don't know what happened when Mark left. We don't know. We assume she bashed his head in and he was dead, but maybe they were able to do something with that. That would be my first thought, that they could get away with that, perhaps. I don't know anyone else that would make sense, but there could be someone I'm forgetting.
Well, I'll tell you who would be, if you wanted to promote going in a new direction and being more peaceful and loving, and
Bert.
His brother-in-law.
Oh, his brother-in-law?
I mean, all of a sudden, a popular author of a self-help book, you need to change your organization.
Wow.
I mean, there's a reason. I'm not saying I'm sold on that, but thinking about the corporate rebrand they do, we're the kinder, gentler, we're listening, right? And that book was such a big part of Mark in the first season, and even Dylan starts reading it, and there's a reason they don't show you who's the head of security. The head of security was important in season 1. I believe that had to be who that was, and I think who it is we've already seen, and that's as far as I'll go about that. So,
okay, I can go along with that, and I can go along with also ending this podcast. So,
praise Kier.
Praise Kier. Because you carry the hurt with you. You feel anyway. All right, so we will be back next week to discuss the second episode of season 2. I believe that one is going to be titled "Goodbye, Mrs. Selvig." Hey, would it be hilarious if they had back-to-back episodes that both name both sides of Patricia Arquette's character, and if she didn't appear in either episode, that would be. Yeah. I'm fairly certain she will show up in that one, but it'd be kind of funny if she did. I'm assuming that we're going to be spending some time in the Audi world to find out what happened, in those moments when the Innies went bye-bye. And maybe we'll get the real truth about her supposed firing and so on and so forth. Let's see, any other podcasting news? Hey, I meant to mention at the beginning of this podcast, and you're too humble to have said it yourself. Y'all may have noticed it was different music at the beginning of this podcast. Well, that was music composed by none other than Brian. So thank you for that. There will be a different tune that he has composed for the end of this podcast. And now you have yet another reason to stay tuned for both the beginning and the ends. And they're both pleasingly short, unlike, me. So anyway, podcasting is, other than the fact that me and Brian will be covering Severance next week and every week after. As I mentioned on the Best of 2024 podcast, I am also gearing up to launch a Twilight Zone rewatch podcast, which will be under the STVD banner. And the plan is to kick that off sometime during the week of February 3rd. I believe the first episode might feature myself, Jamie, Brian, and Joe Fortunato. And I think which makes it a little unwieldy, but I'll figure it out. But from that point on, it should normally be me and just one other co-host that will be covering 2 episodes per podcast. And we will be doing it we will try to stick as close as we can to an every 2-week schedule. So that way we'll be done with season 1 of Twilight Zone sometime probably in late September. Anything else? Oh, and if you care about the Scott Forgot the 80s podcast, I am going to stick to my word, and I will release a new one finally on, I'm going to go with what I said on the previous podcast and say it's going to be released on Valentine's Day, and it'll be me by myself covering both Flashdance and Purple Rain. I've actually watched Flashdance now, and I've written all my notes and snarky comments, and believe me, there was a lot of things for me to make snarky comments about, so that one will be fun. If you've seen Flashdance, it might be worth listening. Here, spoiler, I'm not going to be kind. Anyway, but I got to distill those notes into an actual, podcast. And then I got to figure out when I'm going to watch Purple Rain. All right. So that's about it. I mean, look, you know where to find us because you're already listening. And, seek and ye shall find the Serious TV Drama Podcast. We're on Instagram and the deservedly hated Twitter or X, whatever it is as well. More importantly, Brian, thank you so much for joining me as we embark on this new podcasting adventure talking about Severance. I wish it was a show that we also had issues with because when you sent the file names for the opening and closing themes, I noticed you titled them Severance, and I went, "Ooh, that would be a good segment on the show. Like whenever we have something we don't like, we want to yell. Like, no, now we're up to Severance." Me cursing for 5 minutes about Gotham. Ooh, that's a flashback. Anyway.
Hopefully, we won't get there with the quality of this show.
Yeah, I think the show's too good for it. So, like I said, thanks to Brian, and thanks for listening. And remember, the music dance experience is officially canceled.
Up the elevator I go.